Hello and welcome back to AI Ethics Now. My name is Dr. Tom Ritchie and I'm really excited today to be joined by Stephen Taylor. Hi, Stephen.
Hey Tom, how are you?
I'm not too bad. How are you doing?
Not too bad.
Good. Do you mind introducing yourself and just telling us a little bit more about your role and your interest in the topic of AI, please?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Stephen Taylor. I'm the Learning Technology Lead at Regent's University in London. So that means basically, unlike IT services who are there to make sure technology works for you, I'm here to make sure that you can work with technology to make sure you're using it as pedagogically soundly as possible and it all makes sense. At least that's what I hope.
I imagine you've had a very busy last couple of years then, since about November 2022, when ChatGPT suddenly exploded into public consciousness.
Oh, certainly, yes. Very much so.
Good. Well, I'm really excited to talk to you today. So we're going to be focusing on the topic of technology panics, a history of fear and loathing. So, getting straight into it, Stephen, how do you think that past fears about technology have shaped our current perception of AI?
Oh, massively. Massively so. People are always scared of the unknown and scared of change. Um, there's a philosopher called Bourdieu who came up with a concept called habitus. And much like your habits define who you are as a person, habitus is how everything about your life, everything that you've experienced up until that point, all your what your peers feel, what your family feels, what your previous experience has been, all gear you up for how you're going to respond to something new. So, as a society, our habitus is very much technology has come along, changed very quickly, at least triplicates in complexity every single year. And that's based on an outdated model. It's going even faster now. So, lots of change, short period of time, impacting on people's jobs, impacting on people's lives, getting the headlines from the newspapers who will always lead with the negative rather than the positive, because that's what sells. So in your psyche, it's always there. And the question that we've got to decide is, are we going to try and be like the people who stood up against the tractors and tried standing in front of tractors to stop them from working? Or are we actually going to climb in the driver's seat and direct how it's going to work so it doesn't impact us negatively? And I'm firmly in the latter camp.
How do you think that those listening to this podcast can also join that latter camp? Because I think you're right. I think this is a technology that we will have to embrace. But there are some challenges. And I think you mentioned about this concept of habitus. And I think for lots of the students on the module, they will have their own almost disciplinary habitus where they react to the use of AI within their context in a very specific way. And I wonder if you've got any reflections or thoughts about actually how to step outside of that and be able to see the benefits and the usefulness of AI.
Yeah, that is the problem, particularly whilst we're at a higher education level, is getting that information across, getting the cross-departmental, non-siloed approach is quite challenging, mostly because of how universities have traditionally been set up. My role as a learning technologist sees me occupy what's called the third space. We're not academic. We're not professional services. We're not a specific department. We sort of float on top of everything and bring everything together. And that's the same sort of approach that needs to be taken when you're thinking about AI. So you need to be working together on it. There's big initiatives that are looking at this. JISC has their AI maturity framework. There's a new thing coming out called the Human Intelligence Network, which is seeking to see human intelligence in the background of all AI going forwards. And that's just two of hundreds of different sorts of initiatives that are out there to try and bring this thinking to the fore. I quite like what companies like Anthology are doing with their Blackboard implementation of AI, where it's giving you ideas. And I still don't like the fact that they call it auto-generate content, and I think it should be auto-ideate content, because that's what our AI should be used for. But it's there as a tool to support you. It's like a calculator. A calculator is doing the sums in the background for you, so you don't have to spend ages going through multiplication tables or whatever to figure out what you're trying to get to. You just type it into the calculator and it gives you an answer. Well, with AI, you type in the question that you have, and it's not going to give you a correct answer. That's what a search engine's for. If you want a correct answer, go into Google, Google the answer. Do not trust a AI as far as you can throw it for giving you a correct answer. However, giving you ideas, that's a whole different ball game. You can say, I'm wanting to teach about this, or I'm wanting to display this information in an interesting manner. What suggestions do you have? And it will then give you those suggestions, and it'll do some of the menial groundwork for you as well. So it's actually freeing up that creativity that's within all of us. You just need to treat it as if it's somebody who you are having a critical conversation, bouncing ideas off, rather than it being this is a tool that's just going to do it for me.
I really enjoy how you separate out the way that we understand how search engines work and how AI works. And I don't think I'd separated them until you said that. I would see Google and say Gemini as very similar places to ask questions. But I love that way of thinking about it, of you're not going to get the correct answer, but you'll get some interesting answers, and it will help you, as you say, ideate. And I think that's such a key word. It's one that I've spoken about in many different contexts as well. Particularly in relation to something called design thinking, where ideate is one of the stages. And actually, AI is a fantastic tool to give you 20 ideas. Now, the 20 ideas it gives you, 19 of them might not make any sense, but actually one might be a great one that you can almost then add your value to. And I think as well, you've drawn out a really interesting point about how we as humans need to understand what's the value that we can bring to this interaction with AI. So it's not about the mundane tasks of, can you rewrite me this email? And actually, if you can save that 5 minutes to rewrite it, then great. Put that towards something else that's more valuable. And I think you've unpicked some really great themes, particularly around, you said about the JISC maturity index and the human intelligence organization. I think that there's such interesting ways of understanding ourselves, and we won't go too much into it, but it links towards this idea of post-humanism, actually, about how do we understand ourselves as a species, almost in relation to this technology, which perhaps it could be argued what separates AI from previous kind of technologies that we've used. You mentioned about the role of the media in your first answer, about how we people tend to get these perceptions from what they see online or things like that. But I wonder if I could ask you, what role do you think the media plays in shaping public opinion about AI?
Far too great a one. I know for many people who are Gen Alpha, Gen Z, and Millennial, the news media isn't necessarily something we trust anymore. And we'll search out our own sources and verification of things, which has its pros and cons, because how do we know that our sources are verifiable as well? But the media does still have a huge influence, particularly on people who are in the leadership roles. Because when you look at those age brackets, we're in the younger generations. And I know millennials, we're now approaching our 40s or in our 40s, which is a very scary thought. But the influence is there very, very strongly. A lot of people don't have the curiosity to go and find out about it because it's not something that interests them. So all they see is a headline somewhere. Or they have a friend who says, "Oh, have you seen this? It's a bit worrying." And it's always written in an attention grabby, flexing of the truth manner, at the least, to try and get you to read. But even newspapers realize that 100% of people will see the headline. 30% of people will read the first paragraph. And then something like 5% will read the rest. So you need to go beyond just the first initial bit and read the rest of it and see where the sources are to actually get the full picture. But unfortunately, we know a lot of people won't, and a lot of people don't. So how do we counter that? And that's not just an AI question. How do we counter it? How do we help people to understand things in a way that's simplified enough for them to understand it? Again, news media is all written as if it was a 6-year-old watching or reading it, because that's the average reading age that they go for. And I know, particularly at our higher education standard, we tend to intellectualize things a lot. Not necessarily on purpose, but it's because we know the words. Look at academic papers. If you were to give an academic paper to your parents and just have them read it as is, they won't understand it at all, because it'll be using so much industry-specific jargon. And newspapers' job is to try and take that, and media's job in general is to take that jargon and try and make it accessible and understandable. But they do have an agenda at the end of the day. And I know a lot of journalists will be worried that key skill they've got of simplifying things, of writing it in an attention-catchy way, AI will be able to do that. So they've got that fear there. So even if they're not intending for fear to be imposed there, it will be just through osmosis. It's you can't say that it's a bad thing that they do it and that there's fear-mongering in there. You can't say it's a good thing. It's just you need to have that more rounded view and that more critical view, which, if you're listening to this podcast, I'm making the assumption that you definitely do have that critical thought to it, because that's why you're listening. But it's our job as somebody who does think about it critically to talk to our friends, to talk to our families and explain to them, what's it actually doing? What is there something to be worried about there or not?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the key word you mentioned there was curiosity. I think curiosity was a really important word, and it's something that we have to encourage our students a lot, to be curious and to develop that curiosity. And it's a skill set. I think as well, it's the ability to ask why. And we talk a lot as well about the 5 whys. Something else you've said that's really important to take on board for our students is to understand the importance of communicating clearly. We talk a lot about public engagement, science communication particularly, but the ability to communicate an idea clearly and in a way that sparks that curiosity, that's a skill set. You know, AI can help with that, but that's a real skill set. If you can tell a story and take people with you, then particularly in relation to AI, because it's such a fraught landscape, it feels at the moment, and such an unsure thing where you see headlines that range between, you know, there will not be a single job left in the world because AI will take them all over, or Terminator's coming, you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger's coming, he's coming for you, yeah, and you're all going to be living under the yoke of an AI, and you think, well, it has to be somewhere in the middle. And as you say, it's not a good or a bad thing, perhaps, that the media presents it in that way. It's just, how do we, and by extension, how do we then teach others to navigate that and to understand perhaps where to situate themselves in relation to that narrative around AI? How do you think we can avoid repeating some of the mistakes of the past when it comes to AI?
It's very difficult, mainly because the people holding the reins, the companies controlling it, are the same companies that made the mistakes in the past, or the same style of people who made the mistakes in the past. The biggest thing that we need to be doing with AI is making sure it has multiple voices powering it, multiple cultures. We can't afford for this to be yet another version of colonialization. Not intentional colonialization. I must say that and be very clear on that. They're not intentionally doing it, but the vast majority of AI algorithms are trained on the works and ideas of white Anglophonic people who speak English. It's based on, you know, that sort of thing. And various other cultures end up getting minimized because of it. And a lot of AI tools are trying really hard to fix that. And unfortunately, again, coming back to the media and how they can have an agenda and they can have things that they want to highlight. I don't know if you remember a few months ago, Google Gemini got its image generation pulled down for a little bit because it had weighted it. So then people of color appeared more frequently than they ordinarily would do. So, say they had a rule in place. Say they'd been trained on all of these images, and 90% of them have been of white people or Caucasian people. They changed the algorithm a bit and said, right, okay, so rather than looking at that 90%, let's say we'll put people of colour up to be 50%. So it's 50-50 what you're going to get out. But that then led to images being generated by people acting in poor faith that had people of colour in Nazi uniforms and things like that. Now, the AI is going to make what you ask it to make. That's what it does. And if you say a person, then yeah, a person there should be a 50% chance of skin colour or whatever percentage chance. You know, the skin colour doesn't matter if you're saying a person, except for in a few contexts where it really does matter. And we're not at a stage yet where that has been programmed in. And that's where the issues around that have come from. But instead of having that critical conversation, saying, actually, this is a bad thing that has come from a good place and is a training moment of understanding, people just went mad about it. And that is the difficulty with these things. Particularly, again, you asked on the history of it. The history has always been dominated by white European sensibilities. The internet is dominated by all sorts of content that's predominantly written or created by that that subsection of humanity. And since the internet is what's training the AI models, of course it's going to be unfairly biased that way. And you're going to have to modify the algorithms to say, well, yeah, I know it's written by this much, but let's twist it a bit and bring these alternative cultural views in. And it's how do you get that in without making an ungodly mess of mashing it up. You quoted a word to me earlier before we started of the enshittification of things, and that is what you risk happening: the enshittification of culture, because it's not as simple as just saying, let's make sure there's always a 50% chance it's going to be this or that or whatever. It needs to be context based. And AI works by writing a sentence or creating something based on context around it. But that context is, this has happened here previously. And they've literally just slotted a thing in saying, when you come across this thing where it says this has happened previously, actually make it do this. Give it a coin toss. That's not complex enough. But AI isn't complex enough for that yet. It will be in the future. But at the moment, it's more akin to a toddler's brain. And toddlers come out with the most unhinged, hilarious things. And that's what you've got to understand with AI. It's going to come out with unhinged things that seem to make sense because there's been a correlation between the two.
Yeah, and I think a huge part of that comes from almost like a fundamental misunderstanding of what AI is actually doing when you ask it that question. I think many people don't use AI. It's not the majority who use it yet in the way that perhaps we're talking about. But even amongst those who do, there's an assumption that it's conscious in the way that we would think a human is, and it has that intelligence and that wisdom, and it's not, as you say, it's algorithms, it's probabilities, and it's in some cases just predicting the next most logical letter in the response that it's giving you.
That is exactly what's going on. There's been a thing all over TikTok over this past week about trying to get ChatGPT to tell you how many R's are in the word strawberry. Now, the reason it's struggling with it so much is because it's turning it into code. You ask it, how many R's are in the word strawberry? And it's splitting it up. So each one of those words is a separate code. It's not looking at the word itself. It's looking at a code that represents the word. So that code isn't showing it the word strawberry. It's showing it a code. And that's why it's struggling. And when you split it up and you spell it out, it can cope with it because you've then given it more chunks to work with. But until then, it's working off the fact that it sounds like there's only 2 R's in it. And again, it's that toddler thought process that's there. It's not advanced. All it's doing is holding the conversation with you. And it is more advanced than a toddler in the fact that it's using all of this knowledge in the background for it. But ultimately, it is the same as a little kid just sitting there making these insane leaps of logic. The cognitive bit isn't there for it to actually understand what it's doing. And I don't necessarily think we want AI to get that cognitive function, because that then opens up a very large ethical quandary for us. And AI already poses a lot of ethical quandaries on all sorts of things that we won't necessarily even have thought of. And how much water does it take to keep one of the AI centers running? How much electricity is it taking? I know they're having to build an entire new power infrastructure for the new Microsoft one that's being built in America, because it's going to use the same as a small city just for powering Copilot. So, there's all sorts of ethical dilemmas already there. Do we want to bring it to consciousness? I don't think so. But actually having it being capable of making predictions of what to say within a context to help us build ideas is the best use of that tool without it becoming something scary.
It's a good way to conceptualize what AI may develop into, because as you've alluded to, and we've touched on very gently, this compounding of bias and ethical quandary of particularly for people and nations in the global south, where not only are you not represented in the training data, you're the ones paying the climate costs of setting these things up. And then you're maligned because of the way AI works in representing people, as you said, with the example of Gemini's image creator. Your relationship with AI is on a lose-lose basis at that point. And that's really challenging, isn't it? With that said, I wonder, what do you think are the most important steps that we can take to ensure a more positive future with AI?
We need to centralize these tools. That's what we need to do. And instead of having it in the power of big corporations who are only really interested in making profits, and it's infinite profit for some reason rather than just comfortable living off profit, we need to have more voices there. We need to maintain the human integrity behind it all. We need to see it as not a tool for replacement. There are some jobs that will be replaced. Unfortunately, that is the nature of the beast with technology. If your job is to just input data day in, day out and not analyze it, just input it, chances are that is at risk. If it's your job to write clickbait articles, unfortunately that's going to come and be gone. If you were, and looking at it through academia, there used to be big farms for writing academic essays for people. They're all shutting down or moving to AI because that job is not needed anymore. The AI can do it. But that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. What that means is the really boring menial work AI can step in and do, which frees us up to be more creative. It frees us up to be more human. How many people go to their desk job on a Monday just feeling like a robot doing the same thing over and over and over again. Now, granted, AI can solve that. Corporations are going to have to change how they do things to allow this human creativity and to not have it negatively impact people. But the AI itself is just a tool. So the AI isn't something to be worried about. It's what people are going to do with the AI. That's the thing to be worried about. AI itself is exciting. It's going to open up so many possibilities. I can't draw to save my life. I would love to. I've always had these ideas of things that I want to make. AI has made that a possibility for me. I am neurodivergent. I've come across an AI tool called Goblin Tools, and I can just put into it the things that I struggle with. And the level that I struggle with, it calls it the neurospicy level of 1 to 5. But that'll do things like break down a task into its component parts, depending on how difficult I've said it is for me to do. And AI has been able to take that thing that causes me so much cognitive distress of trying to figure out the steps, and it's doing it for me. We don't want to head towards a corporate sort of cyberpunk dystopia. I'm an optimist. I want us to go towards a solar punk. So solar punk is a whole genre of sci-fi. I suppose the best one would be Star Trek, is a solar punk future where the differences between not just humans, but between other species as well that they find in the galaxy is eradicated. And no one is being paid to be in Starfleet because you can just go and get a thing from a machine whenever you want to. People are there doing it for their own benefit and joy. All of their basic needs are met. And that's solar punk, where everything's met so you can actually embrace the future positively. Now, do I think we'll end up at that sort of stage? No. I think we're going to be somewhere between cyberpunk and solar punk. But I hope we're closer to that side. And AI could actually help facilitate that quite a lot. Especially since if you look at it as a breakdown of people's jobs, the things AI can do make those top level jobs less relevant, whereas the more what people might call bottom level jobs, the people who are creating, the people who are doing the groundwork, the people who are cleaning and that sort of thing, they are so much more important because you need a human doing it.
I love the idea of solar punk, and it's something that I'll look into. But I think it's a lovely place to end. So thank you so much, Stephen. It's been really interesting to talk to you. Have a lovely rest of the day, and I'll speak to you very soon.
Thank you very much, Tom.